So welcome to True Hope Community Online. I just spoke to someone this past week who, again, told us that every week they're faithfully participating online. So welcome those here in person and those who are joining us online. It was good to praise God together in song, and it is good to continue in our journey. Again, this is just a test. I just want you to know. Just a test. So as Patty surmised, we are in Exodus. Very good, Patty. How do you know? And we left these Israelites after a midnight trek with a massive floodlight, as in the pillar of fire, leading them through the dry on the dry land through the sea. And can you imagine what that must have felt like coming to the other side? Like look at what God did. They're all drowned, and here we are. We walked through on dry land, and we made it. So this is where we catch up with them. And you'd expect that if you went through something that dramatic, you would never forget. It would change you forever, and you would never again doubt God. Right? If it had been us, we would for sure know that you could trust God, and we would never wonder, well, okay, that's not really true how it goes, right? So we catch up with Exodus 15, and we're only doing 22 through 27 today because it's water and then bread and then water again. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to blend that all. We're just going to it would be a big mush. So we're just going to look at water today. So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea. Then they went out into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days into the wilderness and found no water. So we're going to stop 3 days. We've heard of 3 days before somewhere? Yeah, Jonah, 3 days, right? Patty preached on Jonah. We just came through Easter. And us chronological Greek-based people tried to count Friday, Saturday, Sunday morning. That doesn't make 3 days, but it's, of course, a different counting and a different way. But there's other 3 days. Did you know that Paul, when he met Jesus, still named Saul, on the road to Damascus, and he was blinded? He was actually blinded for 3 days, and he didn't eat food or water. 3 days. It's a big deal when this happens. That's in Acts 9:9. But also in Exodus, when God spoke to Moses, he said, you will go on a 3-day journey into the wilderness. Well, here we are, 3-day journey into the wilderness. And in Exodus 10:22, we read that one of the plagues was darkness. And they had 3 days of darkness that was so thick that they could feel it. And we talked about how awful that darkness was, and that we even read about that in Revelation, that there's darkness then during the end times where people were so freaked out about it, they gnawed their tongues off. It's like that dramatic. When God isn't around, it's a whole different story. So they went 3 days into the wilderness and found no water. It also turns out that apparently 3 days is the maximum you can go in the wilderness without water in the desert. That's the maximum your body can handle. So they came. Now when they came to Marah, they could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore the name of it was called Marah, because Marah means bitter. And so, can you imagine? Are you kidding, God? Here, now we are finding water and you can't drink the water? You ever almost you almost rescued and it didn't quite look the way you had hoped? So here they are, and it's bitter. So wildernesses, did God ever send you into a wilderness? Maybe not literally, but metaphorically?
Yes.
Yeah? Anybody here not been in the wilderness? That might be a faster, less hands. And wilderness, God uses the wilderness. Oftentimes, wilderness experiences come after a mountaintop experience. When was Jesus sent into the wilderness? After his baptism. And what happened at his baptism? God spoke from heaven. The Holy Spirit descended on him. He started his public ministry. And we tend to think when we get that, this time with God where it's the big aha. It feels like, okay, now we're done with all that stuff and we're going in the right direction. And God says, that's so cute. Actually, we're going to take a hard left. We're going to get into the wilderness because I got something to say to you. We're actually at greatest risk when we've had a mountaintop experience because we feel invincible. And we're in fact in the most danger at that place because we ourselves are not invincible in any kind of way. And so the wilderness tends to be unpleasant. It's a time of trial and oftentimes a time of intensified trial and pressure. It is where our faith is tested, and it can be a time of spiritual attack. But this testing oftentimes is God ordained. Most of the time when we go into a wilderness. And wildernesses can be short, or they can be years or decades. It kind of depends on what kind of wilderness you're sent in. And people always, all of us, when we first are sent in the wilderness, we tend to freak out like something is wrong. Because if it was right, and if I was walking with God, this would not be happening to me. When people react that way, I tend to say, have you ever read the Bible? Have you heard of Moses and Joseph and Jonah and Jesus? Right? Like every single one of them ended up in a wilderness, in a desert, and certainly not because they were off track, but this is what God does. He gets a hold of you. He gets your attention. Okay, you heard the call. Now you're ready. Boom, in the desert. Because the desert, very interesting. I sometimes read the devotionals by a guy called Aussie Dave. That's his Instagram name. His name is Dave Abramson. He is from Australia, hence Aussie Dave, right? He is an online pastor, and he loves using Hebrew words. And he says the Hebrew word for wilderness is midbar. And the Hebrew word for to speak is medabar. And they both have the same root. And then the word for word is davar. And it also has the same root. So his theory is that God speaks in the wilderness. Everywhere. Well, and he speaks in the wilderness because what do we do when we're not in the wilderness? We're running around, going to work, we're doing our own thing. We invite Jesus, but we keep doing our own thing, and Jesus, come along, right? Come along, that's fine, you can come along. But we're not sitting and waiting and hearing. And then God's like, okay, let's go in the wilderness. Let's strip you from everything that you can handle, everything that you can control, everything that you understand. And now you're ready to listen. We don't like it. But it's when God works in us to prepare us for that next phase of the journey. You can avoid the wilderness, but then you also avoid God's blessings and his training and everything he has for you. Those happen in wilderness experiences. I can honestly say all the deep, deep learning I did in faith, in the Lord, always were a result of being in a desert. It's rarely when it's a picnic or a happy clappy time. That's not when we listen super well. But it can be bitter, right? It can be bitter. This water that we get to drink. And so what happens is the people, probably tasted the water and complained against Moses saying, what shall we drink? Are you kidding, God? You brought us here to water we can't drink? We're going to die. How long since they crossed the Red Sea?
Just 3 days.
That's all it takes, apparently, to forget what God can do. Okay, and so the question when we hit our next hiccup, and there's going to be a next hiccup, is who are you going to believe? You going to believe God? Whether it makes sense or not? And honestly, most of the stuff God does makes no sense. Have you noticed?
Yeah.
Are you going to believe yourself and your own best thinking? Are you going to believe Satan? Who are you going to follow? Because that ultimately is what happens every time we get to a wilderness, any path on the road, any decision point, any bitter stuff. Because we all deal with fear, right? Maybe fear of what we've left behind, fear of where we're going, fear of where we are now, fear of the unknown. I mean, it's not super hard to be afraid this day and age. Everything is a mess. Everywhere. Nothing is normal anymore. Maybe we're in pain. Pain of loss, or pain of exhaustion, or physical pain, or mental pain, or emotional pain, pain of hardship. And it's easy to get stuck when things are not going good. When you're in the wilderness, it's easy to get stuck and to blame God and to complain. You know, where are you? And why is this happening? And how come? Because we kind of assume that God owes us a good life. Right? Isn't that how we live? Yeah. Hey, I belong to you. I said yes. Where's my promised land? Isn't this how it is? And God's like, we're heading there. It's called heaven. You're not there yet, so keep on marching. Keep on moving. Keep on going. And this bitter can be from struggles with life or challenges, especially when we feel out of control, right? Some of us need more control than others, but all of us like an element of control. We don't like to be just without anchor floating about. But God has for us exactly to be in those places, because it's a test of will you trust? Will you follow? Will you believe? Will you go where I send you? Well, where is that? Will you go where I send you? Well, what's it look like? Well, will you go where I send you? And God will just wait and wait and wait until we go, I'm coming. I don't need to know. Just go, I'll come. But it takes us a long time to say that, doesn't it? Some of you have heard me say, the answer is yes. And the rest will, God will show you when you need to know. Because any other answer doesn't get you to where God has for you. And you can stay where you want. Guess what? If this is a lesson God has for you, you know what's going to happen next? It's coming again. Still don't listen? It'll come again. And God doesn't give you okay, I'm ready to obey. What do you want from me, Lord? What's your will for my life? Crickets. Well, a good question is, have I done the last thing God invited me to? Right. If not, he's probably not going to show you the next thing. This is just how God is, because you didn't learn what you needed to know to be ready for the next part of the journey. And this is not pleasant for any one of us, but we have a choice to make, right? You believe or you don't believe. So Moses cries out to the Lord. So he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree. Medieval commentators associate that with a cross, because they have bushes around there. And some commentators say, well, it's this kind of bush or that kind of bush, but that place still exists. Mara, it's not called Mara per se, but the place still exists where Arabs won't even let their camels drink because the water isn't really drinkable. And they've tried the bushes around, and it doesn't do the magic sauce to the water. The water doesn't become sweet. So this was a magical tree that God provided, right? And the tree that God provided gets us out of bitter into sweet, right? So he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree. You kind of would expect the rod again, wouldn't you? Just stretch out your rod, touch the water with the rod. We'd like the old thing. We always do it this way, right, God? So we're using the thing we know, but God does a new thing. And when he cast it into the waters were made sweet. David Guzik, who both Patty and I use as one of our sources, has this as part of his commentary. In his work on the Exodus journey, Buckingham, a scholar, explains how this may have worked. The chemicals in the sap of this miraculous tree that was provided, right? That's me adding. The chemicals in the sap of the broken limb drew the mineral content down to the bottom of the pools and left only the good water on top. This may be how it happened. Doesn't really matter how it happened. It happened. And so the waters became sweet. When Jesus enters our life and we trust in the cross and we cling to that, the waters become sweet even if we're still in the wilderness. They hadn't left the wilderness, right? They're just at a drinking spot. So there he, God, made a statute and an ordinance for them, and there he tested them. It even says it, I'm not making this up, and said, if you diligently heed the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his sight, give ear to his commandments and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you. This is what God says. I will put none of the diseases on you which I have brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. So bad circumstances in our life, which we interpret as bad, can be a result of, can be because God is testing us. It can also be a consequence because of choices we made. But even those, God puts right back in the realm where he uses it for our good. So it can still be a test. And he tested them, and it's like Psalm 37:4 says, delight yourself in the Lord. Put me first. Do what I say. Worship me. Follow me. And I will give you the desires of your heart. Because if you do all that, your desires are going to line up with God's desires, right? So Buckingham has further speculations that even though the waters were now drinkable, there was still a significant magnesium and calcium content in the water. Some of you probably know what that means then. The laxative effect of this would clean out the digestive systems of the children of Israel, cleansing them of common Egyptian ailments such as amoebic, dysentery, and bilharzia. Have you heard of that? A weakening disease common among Egyptian peasants. In addition, calcium and magnesium together form the basis of a drug called dolomite, used by some athletes as a performance enhancer in hot weather conditions. It cleanses you out and it strengthens you up. At Mara, God provided the right medicine to both clean out their systems, to leave Egypt behind, and prepare them for a long, hot march to Sinai. So this may or may not be true, but that could totally be God, because he does say, I will put none of the diseases on you which I have brought on the Egyptians. Why do you say that if you just made the water sweet? There's more going on. And then he says, for I am the Lord who heals you. I am Jehovah Rapha. I am the one who heals you. So at this bitter water experience in the middle of the desert where they're being tested and it isn't the way they wanted and it isn't the way they expected, they learn more of who God is, who God is going to be for them, what they needed to know for the next part of the journey. They experienced his provision for that moment, exactly what they needed. And that is our God, right? So what do you need right now? Do you need healing? In your heart, your mind, your soul, your body? It is the Lord who heals us. We might not get our total healing down here, but when we say yes to Jesus, we are healed. We live eternal now. And eventually we will get new glorious bodies. Not these ones that are getting creakier by the day. So they leave Mara. Then they came to Elim, where 12 wells of water and 70 palm trees. They got to an oasis. 12 wells of water and 70 palm trees. All is good now, right? So great to be with the 12 wells and 70 palm trees. Those are both big numbers that mean stuff too, right? 12 disciples, the 12 tribes of Israel. 12 is a number God uses. And 70 is a number that God uses. So they camped there by the waters. You know what didn't happen at Elim? No miracles. God didn't show up in a powerful, noticeable way. There was no new revelation. Do you see the difference? In the wilderness and with the bitter water, when it's hard and we have to call on God, this test brings us to an experience of him that we can only get in that way. But when all is lovely and wonderful, it may not be where God is. I mean, he's always with us, but it may not be where we get that next amazing experience with the Lord. I can honestly say that the times I've clung tightly to the Lord was not when I was by 12 wells and 70 palm trees. But when I've clung tightly to the Lord and cried out with all my heart, knowing that there's no one but Jesus, it was always when life was bitter and I was in a wilderness. I can honestly say that I do not know what I would do without Jesus. I don't know how you get through life without Jesus. I don't know how people do it. How would you do life without Jesus? He himself tells us it's pretty impossible. Apart from him, we can do nothing. And if we do not remain in him, we just become dead branches. So I hope that as we look at this, we can see that our bitter experiences in our wilderness are God's invitation to a new experience with him, a deeper knowledge of him, a chance to receive from him what he can only bring you at Mara, in the desert, because he loves you so. And he is the God who heals. And if you are watching this and you don't know Jesus yet, maybe you don't get to go through deserts, then you miss out on God. Maybe you are in deserts and you're trying to do it alone. That doesn't work either. So the invitation is to start considering, maybe this Jesus is who I need to know more about. It's not just praying a simple prayer. It is making a choice instead of your own way or Satan's way, to go God's way and to follow him. And that is a lifelong pursuit. And if that's you, I just invite you to start exploring that and to reach out to us if you want to discuss it. This is our God. He works in all things for our good. He promises in Romans 8:28, our good, his glory. There's never a time that you find yourself in a desert or at bitter waters that it's an accident and that God isn't in the middle of it for something that he is trying to do for you. So we'll sing one more song, and then we'll go to our groups. But I want to invite you to think about, where are you on the journey right now? And how do you need God to show up? What do you need from him? Don't ask why. In my experience, you don't get answers to that question when you ask God why. But ask him, what do you want me to learn from this? What do you have for me in this? So let's praise him with one more song.